All right, so welcome to the workshop. Here we have a 3-year-old project that I just resurrected. This is my XPS foam stand-up paddleboard. So I bought the foam over 3 years ago now. Bought all the fiberglass, all the epoxy, all the supplies. Then I glued the two pieces together, made the basic form, and then it sat. Didn't touch the project for years. And then finally, I don't know what happened, I just got a little bit of spare time and I resurrected this project, did some sanding on it, so now it has more like of a real paddleboard shape to it. So I smoothed out all the corners. The white stuff you see on there is some joint compound that I'm using to kind of fill in any little voids or anything before I get the fiberglass cloth on there, which is the next step. I just wanted to take some video of the blank, the formed blank before I started glassing it, just to kind of capture this part of the process. Didn't really use any special technique, I just sort of eyeballed it. I had a sanding pad with like drywall rasp paper on it, and I was able to use that to pretty aggressively remove the material, and then it kind of left a rougher finish on here, which I'm hoping works out to my advantage. The epoxy and the fiberglass will adhere to it a little better. So I'm going to clean up some of these patches that I just did on here with the joint compound, and then get ready to roll out the fiberglass cloth.
We're going to begin the lamination process by applying a single layer of 6-ounce fiberglass cloth to the bottom side of the board. The reason we only need to do one layer on the bottom side of the board is that the water is going to distribute the load evenly across the entire area of the board. Versus on the top of the board, we are going to do 2 layers of cloth because we're going to have point loads like your feet standing on the board that might dent a single layer of fiberglass. You only have about 20 minutes before the epoxy starts to set up, so you have to work fast and don't focus on any one area in particular, but make sure you get the entire board covered. After the epoxy cures, you have to flip the board over and sand down any high spots on the top side of the board. Once the top side is nice and smooth, it's time to start glassing the deck. The deck will take 2 layers of fiberglass cloth with only one of them overlapping the edges. So one of the things I learned after doing this whole procedure once already, that is trimming the cloth all the way around the board, was that it's really hard to figure out exactly how far down you should cut the cloth all the way around the board. And then also learned when I was glassing the board that a lot of excess cloth just makes it really hard to kind of tuck it under when it's full of when it's full of the epoxy. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to measure the depth here at the center of the board, which was a pretty good amount of overlap. And I'm just going to make a mark on this piece of cardboard and follow all the way around and just cut the cloth to the mark. And that should give me a pretty good even amount of overlap until I hit the corners and the ends. Of course, I'm going to probably just freehand it there, but I think for doing all the way around the sides, that would give me a pretty consistent result. You'll need to make a few relief cuts around the sharp corners so that the fiberglass cloth doesn't get all bunched up when you try to tuck it around the edge. So another lesson I learned from the last time I did this was getting the epoxy resin down all the way to here is extremely important before you try to fold all these under. The only thing is, when you hit the end of the fabric, the little strands of fiberglass tend to kind of get out and get stuck to the so hopefully that's not too much of a pain to clean up and keep up with it. I mixed all the epoxy by weight with a 3-to-1 ratio using a small food scale. In this example, we're mixing 100 grams of epoxy resin to 33 grams of hardener.
The glassing process went much smoother the second time around. I just focused on getting the resin spread all over the board before trying to tuck any of the fiberglass over the edges. Alright, so that time went a lot better. I kind of knew the technique. The whole idea of using the two Bondo spreaders to get the resin over the edge really didn't work out. As it turns out, just using your hands is a lot easier and less tools to worry about. I think I got a pretty even coat. Don't see a lot of pooling. Hopefully this cures up pretty fast. The rear corners gave me a little bit of trouble, so I just put a little extra resin in there, and hopefully that's all it takes to get those to kind of stick together and seal up. The next step is to do the hot coat. After the hot coat, I'm probably going to cut the holes for the handle and the fin box, get the fin box installed, and I think we're only a couple hours away, well, a couple labor hours away from a working paddleboard. So I can't wait to try it out. The hot coat is nothing more than just re-glassing the board without actually adding a fiberglass cloth layer. The point of the hot coat is to kind of fill in any of the voids or air pockets or exposed fiberglass cloth that might still be sticking through to make a nice smooth finish that we can sand. I did all my sanding by hand with 500 grit sandpaper and a sanding block. You can opt to use a power sander, but be careful so you don't burn through the edges. Masking the hot coat cut line gives you a nice clean edge between the top and bottom hot coats. Getting this step right is important because it can save you a lot of sanding later. Installing the fin box on the bottom of the board and the handle on the top of the board were pretty much the same procedure. I used a Dremel with this small cutoff wheel to cut through the fiberglass outer shell of the approximate shape of the fin box or the handle. Then I used a 1/2-inch drill bit to route out the cavity for the fin box. I filled the cavity with epoxy resin and then pushed the fin box into the cavity, removing any excess that spilled out over the sides. Use a square and some masking tape to make sure that the fin box is installed perfectly square and stays that way until the epoxy has a chance to harden. Once our epoxy sets up and is completely cured, it's time to take the board out for a test drive and see how it handles in the open water. The board seemed to perform as well as any professionally made fiberglass foam core board. The board is lightweight, agile, and stable. It may not look very pretty, but from a practical standpoint, this board meets all my needs. This project was also a great way to learn about shaping a foam blank into a usable paddleboard. I learned about board dynamics, volume, displacement, and a lot about the fiberglassing process that I didn't know beforehand. think one of my future projects is going to be to work on a way to transport this board on my bike.